Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Thoughtful Talent Show. I'm Jen Werner from Jen Werner Coaching.
And I'm Chad Ahern from Talent and Teams Consulting. And today I have the privilege of introducing our first guest, Carolyn Grant. Carolyn is a fellow Gallup-Certified strengths coach like Jen and I are, as well as Susan. And she is a consultant for entrepreneurs, leaders, and teams. Her clients include individuals and companies ranging from small entrepreneurial startups to Fortune 100 corporations. Carolyn leverages her background in training and development to provide individualized approaches to her clients so that they can improve organizational, team, and personal performance. Thank you very much for coming to join us today, Carolyn. We're gonna let everybody know what our topic is today, but I'm gonna let Jen introduce Susan first.
Hi, welcome, Carolyn. It's
you.
my honor to introduce to you Susan Gordon. Susan is coming to us from Aberdeen, Scotland. So she is an Eat to Grow coach. She and I met through Eat to Grow virtually during the height of COVID in 2020. She quickly became one of my most favorite people, and you'll see why. She's an Eat to Grow and Gallup certified coach with 30 plus years actually of HR experience. She's now running her own independent consultant business. She gets to do what she's most passionate about every day, which is enabling others to be proud of their own versions of their best self. Ooh. And have fun in the process. On a personal note, on top of her beautiful accent that you'll get to hear, she is such a positive, supportive, and real source for good in the world, and I'm so happy to have her with us today. Welcome, Susan.
What a lovely introduction. Thank you so much.
So today, we're inviting our guests to be here to talk to us about the CliftonStrengths talent theme of developer. So ladies, before we get jumping right in, I wanted to start with where this falls in your top 5. Susan, I'm going to start with you.
Number 2.
It's number 2. And Carolyn, where is it in yours?
Number 3.
Oh, fantastic.
So close developer, almost twins.
Yes, right. So great. So Chad, can you share with us Gallup's definition of developer?
Sure. So like we always do it every episode, we're going to start off with the definition so everybody can sort of level set. I know these two ladies don't need any introduction to this description, but for those listening, Gallup defines the developer theme as follows. People who are exceptionally talented in the developer theme recognize and cultivate the potential in others. They spot the signs of each small improvement and derive satisfaction from those improvements.
Awesome. So we like to spend a little bit of time at the beginning just getting to know you guys and how this really shows up for you personally. So we know that there's, kind of some similarities and differences based on the person. So we really want to start from this personal place. So Susan, I'd like to start with you today. Can you share with us how you feel this developer theme actually plays out in your life, how it shows up for you personally, maybe even at work and at home?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the way it plays out for me is that I've come to understand that I absolutely love seeing somebody else's growth. And if I've got a feeling that I've had a tiny small part in that, it's truly joyous. I love it. And that definitely happens in my work. And I think in terms of the home life, as we sometimes discuss, we've got to be a little bit more mindful almost of home life. But the joy there again when you see friends and family develop and or move forward in some way, and you've had that small part. Pardon me. It is, like I say, just wonderful.
That's awesome. Can you share with us and our listeners what are some of the behaviors others might notice in you with how this shows up?
Yeah, sure. So having had a think about it, I think the sorts of feedback that I've had in terms of the developer stuff is probably a little bit patient. As we'll maybe discuss later, sometimes a bit too patient people,
Okay.
but patient, encouraging, investing in other people, very, very growth focused, forward looking, positive focused, and pragmatic and a connector. These are some of the words that have come that I think kind of link to the developer theme with the other themes that sit around it for me.
Okay.
Oh, that's awesome. Carolyn, I'd love to hear from you. How do you feel your developer shows up for you personally in some of those behaviors, and as well as what others have shared with you that they've seen?
Well, developer, I just love this theme. I think because of developer, I have an intuitive way of, after listening to hear about a person, client, or a new friend, I just see pathways where they could grow if they wanted to grow. Definitely through active listening, and curiosity, the patience to kind of sit in the moment, be present in the moment. And I get so excited when people showcase what they want to do. And then when they respond, because as human beings, we tend to doubt, oh, I couldn't do that. That's for somebody else. Even people high in achiever, they're like, I want to do that, but do I have the right skill set? So it's a natural encourager. And I think that's what people say and respond to myself, natural encourager. And I think another word I'd say for myself is almost like a strategic vision, but through people and how they can grow.
Yeah, that's great. And just hearing that strategic vision, it reminds me, in the pre-show, you had a moment where you shared with us that you felt like it's almost like you had this, like you could see the problem, but zoom out from it to see like what's surrounding it. And I thought that was a really great analogy too. And then you also shared with us, your ability to spotlight talent. Can you share a little more about that?
Yes, because, everybody tends to take their strengths for granted, those natural talents, because we've always been able to do them well, even in childhood. So it's great to kind of sit back, observe, ask questions about people in their past, and then kind of say, hey, this is what I'm noticing in you. And they're like, oh yeah, but that's not a big deal. Yes, it is. That is a part of your unique wonderfulness. And doing more of that is how you reach excellence. And that's always an aha moment.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Thank you.
Yeah. I actually want to touch on something, a phrase you used, Carolyn, and I think I heard it from you as well, Susan, in our pre-show about this idea of doing things through others versus doing the actual tasks. And I'm just wondering, Susan, I'd like to come back to you because that was something that you really brought up and highlighted in our pre-show. And I think our listeners could really get some value out of that. If you could go maybe one level deeper on that phrase and what that means and maybe what it looks like, that could be really helpful. And then Carolyn, if you want to add on to whatever she offers, I'd love to hit, because you brought up the same phrase. I'd like to maybe add on to how it sort of shows up for you as well.
Yeah, and I think yesterday when we were speaking about it on the pre-show, it was a case of thinking about, as Carolyn said, that focusing on the positives, and also when you're in a work environment and tasks are being done, delivery's got to happen. For me, I kind of find that if we're focusing on delivery through enhancing the individuals that are there, then that's much better delivery than just get tasks done. And it can be a frustration because sometimes, you just have to get the task done. Right. So we're back to, the balance of how much time do you spend trying to get a good task done, and maybe that's maximizer coming through, but a good task done through people, which takes much more time and it's maybe more frustrating, but I firmly believe in much better outcomes if you can deliver it through people. And I think that's, Carolyn, maybe you were saying something similar.
Yes, because I was piggybacking on your great idea. So yes.
Excellent.
Yeah, I love that.
And so, just to clarify, Susan, that's a behavior of yours that you've found to be successful, is that you're driving your action more through helping or having others help you achieve a task versus you just doing it directly. Because I think, Jen and I have talked about our responsibility themes a lot. You'll hear that in the responsibility episode. You'll hear it throughout some of our other episodes. But we're much more driven by the actual task and the promise we've made to people. But you're really talking about it as driving at task through other people, having other people come along with you. Do I have that right, or am I missing something?
It's more, as you know, no, I think you're absolutely right. That for me, this ability to take the team with you, for individuals to know what their own place is, I think you get infinitesimally better results in the long term if everyone knows what part they're to play, and they're able to do their best, rather than just the complete task focus of X needs done, let's get it done. And as we all know, sometimes it's just quicker to get it done ourselves.
Right.
Let's stand out of the way. I need it done. And I've probably done that too. But when I'm mindful, it is bringing people with you. Sorry, Jen, go on.
Yeah. No, I was just saying, like, just reflecting on the fact that, this is a relationship building theme. So it falls in the relationship building domain, and I can hear it through both of you. I've experienced it with you, Susan, and Carolyn, just the small amount that I've gotten to talk to you already. I can hear it coming through. This is about building relationships between you and others, and even others and others, to really keep the team strong and people thinking positively about themselves. So I just love where we're going with this. Great. So we talk a lot about when our strengths are coming on a little too hot, maybe that double-edged sword, the good and bad side type of thing. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the negative effects that can come from developer. I think we're our worst critics, if that's the way to put that. Like, we know what those look like when they're coming on too strong, or maybe we've ignored them completely. So Carolyn, I'd like to start with you this time. Do you want to share with us some of the ways that your developer may has potential to negatively impact your life, either work or home? Either one or both is fine.
Okay, so I wanted to kind of just piggyback on the previous conversation as we move into this one. You were absolutely right when you mentioned the relationship building. That's how I influence. That's my strongest leadership domain. And so I get energy when I have a task or I see someone that I can help. I get really excited and passionate. And so, as with any strength, it can be overused. But it is my primary motivator for how I get things done, to envision for myself a task I don't want to do, how to help people. But impact-wise, I guess the best story that everybody related to in the pre-show was from the parenting perspective. I parent someone in high empathy, high deliberative, and I naturally, as a mom, was like, get energy of, oh, wow, she is so awesome. I could see her doing this. I could see her doing that. So I really wouldn't say that I may have overused my developer for a different child, but for this child, who was a preteen at the end, when I first learned about CliftonStrengths, I realized I was maximizing and developing way too much for this person. So it got in the way of our relationship. And once I understood my own CliftonStrengths, I could do that vision of zooming out to see her perspective, because she was not a talker, and about pressures. And then I'm like, oh, I get it now. So it was very, very eye-opening.
Yeah, coming from us, the two of us, Chad and I both have deliberative high, which is why we started this show, this like thoughtful consideration, purposeful use of talents. And really, that I can hear that in you, that you wanted to honor what she needed and her time to kind of process the information that you're giving. So explain to me what that looked like for you and for her in that moment, when you are potentially oversharing what you think she could do with herself. Like,
right. And I don't mean that I was pushy, because I really reflect back, I think it was for her. But it was, so here's an example. If she would say she was interested in, at one point, she was interested in studying occupational therapy. So I also have high input, and so I used my input development. Oh my gosh, it's embarrassing to admit, but then I would say, honey, look at what I found for you about occupational therapy. If you want to learn more, here are a couple of options for you to explore. So I didn't do anything
Yeah.
really for her in my mind, but in her mind,
Yeah.
she was like, wow, I made a comment. And now we
Yeah, now
have
I'm an
all this-
occupational therapist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're sort of off to the races, you know.
We're off to the
Yes.
races. So yes,
Yeah.
I thought I was proposing ideas. Hey, if you want to, and
Sure.
for her interpretation, it was
Mm.
a little too much.
And Chad, I think you played this out perfectly yesterday when we talked about this in the pre-show, of that, like, the abilities and what each different person who is receiving your developer might need. Do you want to, like, share your thoughts on how you explain that? I think you are going to do it much better than I just did.
You're asking me? I'm trying to
Yes.
remember exactly which comment you're referring to.
So it's the where she was saying that for this child, her developer came on too strong, but for a different child, it may not have been enough. So we talked about, like, how depending on the person. Okay, so I'm going to just take this.
Yeah,
So
you're going to take
depending
this
on the
because
person,
I must have made some wonderful
it was-
comment, and
it was wonderful. It was really good because we talked
Well,
about
take it and run.
that developer in you needs to almost understand the person enough to and know their talents in order to, for someone with high deliberative and empathy, maybe we need to dial the developer way down. So you're only going to give her little tiny bits at a time. Whereas someone who's high achiever, high maximizer, high competition, they may want you to dial that, like, all the way up. So, like, yes, tell me how I can be better and what I can change so that I can be number one, you know? So, and I'm sure I did not get that as well as Chad put it.
Well, I now know the comment I think you're referring to, which is that sometimes when, you know, somebody has developer or any of our talents, right?
Yeah.
And we talk about trying to put that in sort of a Goldilocks zone, you know, of the thermostat. When you dial it down from, say, 100, which is what Carolyn is sort of describing here, you know, developer cranked all the way up, and she goes, okay, well, I'm gonna ratchet it down to 70. That may still be too high for somebody else. You know, somebody like myself or her is your daughter, correct? Yeah, who has deliberative or maybe some intellection. You know, somebody that wants to take some time. They may need you come down all the way to 40 or 50% intensity. And so just thank you very much for leading me into that, because now I do remember the comment. But I think it's just really interesting when you were talking about dialing that back, and sometimes it wasn't even dialed down even far enough, depending upon who the recipient of that information is. So,
and I think there's also the bit about, you know, sometimes people can. I think for me, what I've found is that definitely this dialing up, dialing down, and maybe it's me, my maximizer, but just like whoosh.
Yeah.
But the disappoint, you know, we're in danger of taking over somebody else's development path, because
really
of our
good.
enthusiasm and the ability to see, you know, wow, they're fabulous at this, and if they did this and this and this, then wow, they could be this, and maybe they don't want to be. And that's what I've learned is the whole, sometimes people don't want to or can't see the vision that you've got for them, and sometimes it's not the vision they have for themselves. They don't want the Rolls Royce effect.
So
the Lada effect with the 4 wheels and the engine is absolutely fine.
So personally, does that hurt, like, your internal developer? Does that actually, like, pain you to see the potential and it's not moving forward?
Yes, it can. It can be kind of just think, well, don't you know? Don't you know where you could be? And yes, it can be personally feel personally responsible if they're not doing it. So I had to learn that really it's up to them.
Both of you have talked a lot about sort of family situations. I know that, Susan, what you were describing just now, you talked a lot about in our pre-show in relation to family and friends, people that you already know really well. Both of you also brought up some great examples in our pre-show about how this has impacted your work life. And Carolyn, I'm going to come to you first because I thought the example from your own coaching business, I thought was really intriguing and might be informative around people understanding how this might get overused or underused. And if you want to, if you know what I'm talking about, if
No,
not, I can lead you into
I'm
that.
searching my mind. Do you have a little hint that you
Oh,
can
yeah.
give?
So you were saying you often, in the pre-show, you expressed your overall excitement just to go help people.
Right.
And sometimes business-wise,
Okay,
that
I know what
hurts
you mean
you
now.
because you'll do it for free. But
Yes.
Well,
so
not anymore. Anyone out there in the
Good.
audience? No. So years ago, when my first intro to coaching was actually as a consultant as a certified family caregiver consultant. So I helped people who were family caregivers. And in that space, you were dealing with people who were already spending a lot of money helping their loved one with their health issues. So I absolutely had started off not charging enough per my value, but I was where I think I'm going with this is money is not my primary driver for me. Seeing people succeed and grow and living their best life, that is my primary motivator. That hasn't changed. Recognizing that was getting in my way.
Yeah.
Because I became a coach to other entrepreneurs, and I realized that I had fallen into trap that I could see what they were doing. So it helped me grow. So yes, it absolutely did get in my way.
Good.
Yeah. And that's all I want to clarify for our audience. And I know Carolyn started to do it at the beginning, but Carolyn does charge a very reasonable fee that she is going to charge you for coaching.
Yeah.
We're all great, coaches and want to develop people. But I think the point here is that for those out there with developer that might be thinking about doing their own coaching or want to help people in that way, it's a place where you might need to put some thought in that your developer wants to go out and do it potentially for free because it's energizing. We've already talked about the energy it brings to both of you, but at the same time, could they potentially be, a listener be leaving money on the table? And so I thought that was a really helpful insight to share with somebody else. You've already made sort of that leap. I wanted to highlight it so that other people could make that same connection, that same step forward for themselves.
And I think that's great that you highlighted that, Chad. And I'd like to point out that I noticed as I've coached new coaches and new consultants, that they also don't necessarily charge enough, which is really what I was doing, because I'm like, oh, you want to help. So there is a perception of value and based on, as a coach, the rate that you charge. So that's an extra encouragement. I just wanted to point that out. It's a common new coach, new consultant mistake to make.
Right. And it might be exacerbated by the developer theme because you get the energy and that's your payment versus actually.
Yes, exactly.
Or as we learned, Chad, in the belief episode with Gina and I, with having belief high, and we know that this is CliftonStrengths and understanding your talents is so important to you, like living your best life, that we are like, no, we'll give it to anyone. Like who wants a code? Anybody want a code? Like, no, we went through all of this for a reason. We have like purposeful, teachings and learnings and all of this great stuff we have. We need to put an appropriate price on it. And I would say that your developer, my belief, is feeling those same things. I'm sure Chad's Harmony feels it too.
Sometimes. Before we move on to the positive side, I did want to ask Susan if you had any thoughts on sort of developer impacting in a negative fashion your professional life, previous roles you've been in or interactions you've had, relationships you've tried to build. I just didn't want to leave you out of this question as much as we've just talked about how developer has gotten in Carolyn's way in the past.
I think one thing that strikes me is that it's kind of it wasn't huge, but it's kind of because my passion is really seeing people develop and grow in leadership positions, that can get in your way. If you've got hard decisions to make about poor performers or things like that, sometimes it may be that you're back to the too patient with somebody, maybe giving too much time and therefore at times maybe perceived as not willing to make the tough decision.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the driver was different in terms of the hope that, you know, they will find the light and come into it, as it were. So I think that piece can sometimes lead somebody to be seen as being a little bit naive or idealistic in a leadership role.
Yeah. And this is for you personally, or this is, you're just talking more in general? Because I know we're going to get to how this shows up in teams and leaders and followers and so forth, but I'm just wondering if there's been a personal.
For me personally, I think maybe a little bit of that at one stage. But I think it was, for me personally, it's more about the becoming over-invested in someone else's development, whether they don't want to.
Yeah.
That has been certainly a feature at times.
Okay. Well, so I want to move us sort of out of this dark place of talking about the negative impacts, and transition to sort of the other side of the coin, which is really how the developer theme has helped you in your personal life, professional life, community life. We talked a little bit about community life in a couple of other episodes. Where does this come out? And Susan, I'd like to start with you. Just we were just talking about how your developer can somewhat, get a little frustrated with people not wanting to develop as quickly. I'm curious, what's the flip side of that, or are there other positives that have come out in your life through this, through using this theme effectively?
Yeah, I mean, as I've reflected on it, although developer is number two, empathy is number one. I think it's really, really strong. Developer one, should it be number one?
Okay.
And as Jen said in the intro, I've had sort of 30 years of HR roles, business-facing HR roles, and predominantly in those roles, when I was most successful, looking back, that's when I was kind of employing probably what was around developer themes. And now that I've got my own business, I had my own business for a few years now, and it's coaching and mentoring predominantly. The work I do now suits me perfectly. It's just like, whoa, hang on, why did I not do this strengths thing a long time ago? So that I can go, whoa, look, this is really what somebody mentioned earlier about, it gives you energy, it fuels you, and it absolutely does. And so once you've noticed that about yourself and recognize that, and you put your superhero cape on and go, right, this is me and I'm going to do it, it means that those are the pieces of work that I do, that they're the best pieces. When I'm able to employ the developer piece and just see some of the, being able to recognize growth in people, identify for them things. I think Carolyn mentioned earlier, you point out to people, hey, you're great at this. And they go, that old thing. Like, no. These are your superpowers. Please take them. Go and be your Spidey. And seeing that happen, that's the bit for me that's worked really well.
I loved, I'm going to bring it up just because I heard it in the pre-show. I thought it was wonderful. The ability to reflect back and then almost see them puff themselves up, stand a little taller, stand a little stronger. I think the way you've talked about it just now is wonderful, but I wanted to bring that phrase back in because I think that whole image of, oh, I am better than I think I am, or I am, capable. So I just wanted to highlight that. Was there anything else before I want to give Carolyn an opportunity to tell us about how a developer shows up, but is there anything else you wanted to highlight?
I think the only other bit is kind of linked into that, but that piece about helping people really be recognized, be seen, be heard, and sometimes just that reflecting back those bits that they're good at. That's when their little the aha moment, the growth, the potential future movement happens. And again, I think that's through the developer piece. Other people will do it in different ways. But for me, I think it's the developer piece helping people do that.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Carolyn, what would you like to add, or how has this developer theme, benefited you in your life and your work?
Yeah, I think it helps. It showcases my authenticity, that I genuinely care about the other person that I'm in a conversation with or a group of people. That zeroing in, it's felt by the other people, whether it's a team or an individual, and then it's that superpower of being able to zoom in to what's being said and not being said. So overall, yes, it's relationship building themes are highest for me, but it also kicks in the listening of, oh, how could they look at this a little bit differently? How could they see themselves differently, or their own opportunities differently? So I hope, because work life is tough these days. We're lucky.
Yeah.
We love what we do, but not everybody does.
Yeah. There was something you had said yesterday in our pre-show that I found absolutely fascinating, and it had to do with your comment about shame. And some people end up shaming themselves. The way you talked about the theme, it almost sounded like a protective layer for you. And I'm just wondering if you could talk about the intersection of developer and shame, both for yourself and also kind of how you see it in contrast to other people in your life.
Yes. So I have always been one of those people that is we talked about oversharing yesterday on the show, but I have a natural understanding that we're human, and as human beings, we make mistakes. I've always been able to identify emotions in myself and what I see emotions of others, and I never felt uncomfortable talking about that. And I've always encouraged people, that developer, right, to people to talk about themselves. And what I've noticed is in myself, I'm a good person. It's not that I'm perfect. Sometimes I'm too much, sometimes I'm whatever for people. But if I make a mistake, I can get embarrassed, but I'm not prone to shaming myself. And the comment I had made is, in the course of my work, people are very honest. We develop a trusted relationship. Well, they'll share that the word shame comes up quite a bit with people. And that's when I realized that my lens on the world is about growth. And to me, shame is the perception of being stuck in a mistake, or, what does Brene Brown say? I am bad versus I've done bad. I've done something, and maybe that's attributed to someone else. So, but does that answer the direction you wanted to head in?
No, I just wanted to hit on that whole idea around shame, because I thought what you had highlighted in our pre-show in talking about it was really fascinating, in that your developer kind of keeps you out of that shame realm of, there's always opportunity for growth. Yes, I'm going to make a mistake, but then it's about, what's the next step? How do I grow from this? And that growth phrase, or that growth word, often gets very quickly associated or almost tied to this developer theme a lot of the time. And so that was a fascinating observation that I had not really thought about and found interesting.
Just to add to that, it strikes me, it's all about it's kind of like growth mindset versus fixed mindset.
Yes.
And I think, just to underline what Carolyn said, for me, again, it is about the growth mindset, where there's no right or wrong. Yeah, of course there are in some things, but talking about growth, there's not really right or wrong. And therefore, for me, and I think we discussed this yesterday, for me, I'm very much a no regrets kind of individual. Big ticket stuff maybe, but the little bits where you're learning, where you're you made a bit of mistake, but you can move on, learn from it, move forward. And I think that goes back to, maybe it is, as you say, Chad, linked to this word growth and the growth mindset, that I think maybe with the strong developer, that's very much the case. Maybe some of the other themes are more linked to the fixed mindset, where there is right and wrong and answers, and whereas maybe we can live in the grey a little bit more.
I'd like to add on to that. By the way, I didn't have an opportunity to say this yesterday, Susan, but I say no regrets all of the time. And so when you said that, it was a huge aha moment for me. Now I've lost my train of thought, what I wanted to say, building on that, because you said that was so well.
But that's okay.
Yeah. No regrets,
anyway,
right?
No regrets.
That's all I'll add for right now.
All right.
And what I loved about bringing this up too is it's similar to what we saw about like the difference in using your developer with others versus using your developer on yourselves. And that's what I think we saw and heard in this, and why Chad was bringing it back to is that it's not just about others. In that case, you're using that and seeing that in yourselves too. So I can only imagine how hard it must be, especially as a coach with developer high, to see someone make a mistake and feel like they've like lost it all, and have so many regrets in it, where you're like, no, it's okay, you're growing, you're learning. And so I just think it's wonderful they have you two at their backs, supporting them. I just love it.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
And I'd like to add on, if I could, and I'm curious about Susan's thoughts, but for me, being curious, when I first learned about how to coach, they talked about remaining in the moment, present, and curious. I realized that curiosity about why people do what they do was my developer that began when I was a teenager. Do you tap into that word too as well with your developer, Susan? Curiosity.
Yeah, I very much so, in terms of it's just quite interested to know how does this all fit together. So yeah, curious is a word that resonates too.
It's interesting. The word I actually thought you were going to ask her about was the word present, because I know that was another big word that came up in our pre-show. Is it'll really allows you to stay in the present moment with a person, and that being a positive benefit to not only yourselves, staying in the present for yourself, but also for helping others stay in the present moment. Where am I and where can I go? Again, there's that growth. So I wanted to bring up the word present too, because I think curiosity and being present are a key to being great coaches, but also are very wonderful representations, or reflections is probably the better word, of this developer theme. So thank you.
I love that you said that, because being present is my anchor. So I don't start to want for people what they don't want for themselves. So it keeps me balanced between in the moment and the curiosity of what do they want. I can see them doing whatever, but it's my balance.
Yeah. Awesome. We've talked a lot about how this has shown up for the two of you, and we've really wanted to start there to kind of lay the groundwork, give people an introduction to this theme, both the positive and the negatives. We also are all coaches, and so we've probably run across other people with developer. And so I'm just wondering if you have any insights that we haven't touched on that might have you've come across by coaching others with the developer talent theme, in their top 5 or top 10, the sort of high intensity people. And Carolyn, I'm going to start with you, just so that I'm trying to balance who gets to go first here in my harmony at play. Carolyn, if you want to start with maybe some people that you've coached with developer high, and maybe how it's shown up a little differently than what we've already talked about.
I found this fascinating as I prepped for the show. I pulled up I just was scanning the people that I've coached with high developer. And obviously we know as coaches that there's an interplay of all of our top 10 to top 12, where we talents every day. But what was so fascinating for me, and it had been a long time ago that I coached this person, so I had forgotten that. I'm going to read this. Is it okay if I read this to you?
Oh, sure. Yes.
Okay. So this is a really nice guy. And this is what came from his developer, literally from his report. Instinctively, you automatically compare your results to the outcomes others produce. You usually monitor your final scores, ratings, and rankings. You enjoy testing your knowledge, skills, and talents. Even so, because it sounds like competition up to this point.
Right.
Even so, you are pleased to acknowledge the accomplishments and successes of others. Isn't that incredible?
Yes.
That's competition with a hard left turn into developer pretty quickly.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was very eye-opening for me. As a reminder, we are a combination of all of our top talents at work.
Wow.
Yeah. And then the other is, so I know people who use their developer in the construct of kind of facilitating team dynamics.
Hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
In what way? Is there like one other layer you could go there?
Well, the extra layer would be if, because they can clue in and see how the dynamics might be off on their team.
Got it.
So using that to facilitate if there is a misunderstanding, miscommunication,
Hmm.
and that's how it's been effective for quite a few people. They also recognize I've had many people point out to their team member, oh, have you thought about trying it this way or taking this approach?
Hmm.
Interesting.
Interesting.
Yes. Okay.
Susan, what about you? I want to keep adding more examples,
Stuck
so
on
I'm gonna move from Carolyn to Susan and see what else we could add to, or what other ways we've seen developers show up.
So I did similar to Carolyn in prep. I had a look through my Cascade reports and picked out people that I've worked with developer in their top 5. And what was quite interesting to me, and particularly when I saw the list of people, they are team mediators. I think, Carolyn, they are the ones kind of pushing people forward, mediating. But the other thing that was quite interesting is there was more similarities in their themes that sit around developer than there were differences. So there was quite a lot of other relationship themes that were sitting around them, particularly empathy, harmony, and individualization. And so, when I looked at those people and you were asking about what's shown up differently, I thought, actually, when I look at them, they've got very similar styles. So, hearing Carolyn's very different example was great to remind us that mix is different, but it just so happened that was the case. And the other thing that sort of struck me overnight was, do you attract as a coach people who are similar to you?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Oh, good
I
one.
put it out there, don't know.
Yeah.
But it just struck me.
Yeah, I could see that. Like that, at least in my own personal coaching business, I do feel like I end up with a lot of high responsibility, high achiever, a lot of very task focused individuals. So that's pretty interesting.
So although we know, the joy in the 1 in 33 million we're going to be like, there's something there that I thought, oh, okay, interesting. Somebody who's high in something else. Are they going to? And we spoke about some of the frustrations. Is it sometimes that maybe you are too developer-y for the person who just wants to get it done?
Yeah.
So
interesting.
I'm sure that's a thesis dissertation I've just offered somebody there.
I like it.
Yeah.
Chad, I did the same thing as Susan. I went to my Cascade and went through all the different people that I've coached and worked with that have developer high. And I picked out a few that had developer at number 1, and was really interesting to think back about how the person used their developer and remembering what they shared with me. One was a manager who had developer and context high. And I saw him regularly. He would use this by being able to understand the way the other person worked, some of the like hurdles they had gone over before in the past, and was able to help them see like how they could use what they had done in the past for future development, for future goals, for meeting different things. So I just thought it was really interesting because he was very, very context oriented in that, but being able to use that past information and then his own information, because he also had empathy high. He could sense that from his team members. So I just thought that was really interesting. The other one had developer and includer high, and she regularly brought as many people together as possible. So if there was something that needed to be done and somebody was brand new on the team and she's looking to develop that person, like she wants them to learn and be up to speed as soon as possible, she's immediately like glomming people together and like, hey, let's, like, you should work with so and so, and then like she's like with them and everybody's together. You know, I think of like the amoeba of little kids playing soccer, how they're like this all over the field together. Like, that's kind of how she was in using her consistency, her includer and developer together. Like you could see her,
Wow.
like she wanted everyone to be able to follow the rules and regulations, stay within that like framework that was set, but really give them the opportunity to learn from others. So they're just both beautiful examples. So I wanted to share those with you guys too.
Yeah, I wish I had more to offer to this conversation around others I've coached. I'm actually really happy we're having this conversation now, because I've just started working with a cohort of leaders where 3 of the 7 members of the cohort have developer high. So maybe if we had recorded this, or if I come back and do a little addendum to this in 3 to 6 weeks, maybe I'll have more to contribute. But I'm fascinated by everything you've just shared. There is one question, and it doesn't necessarily fit with how it shows up differently in clients or other people we've interacted with developer. But what you've brought up, especially Jen's example around bringing people together, and Carolyn and Susan, you've touched on this in slightly different ways throughout this conversation. I'm curious if developer is more impactful for you at the individual level, or as seeing developer develop a whole team kind of together, kind of, to build on what Jen's image was, is, as the group moves, they develop, together, they grow bigger together. We've talked a little bit about this idea, I think in our empathy episode, where somebody was talking about they can get a better read on an individual if they're actually in a larger room, because they have more emotional broadcast stations from the other people, so they can feel the differences. Whereas another person with empathy, they have to be one-on-one to get sort of the truest read on those emotional wavelengths. I'm sort of using that as an analogy now, looking at developer. Do you find your developer works better one-on-one, or when you can see the grander context of they're developing within a certain environment or within a certain team? Yeah. That was a little long-winded intro, but I'm going to put the question first. Carolyn, it looks like you have something immediate to say, so I'm going to put it to you first. But Susan, I'm going to come back to you.
I do. So it's that radar that my best scenario, and for all coaches, is when you can do a one-on-one first, and then the team gets together. So know people as an individual. It is harder for me to start with just the team and not begin with the individual. I can do it, but I feel a little starved for information when it's the group first and only.
Got it.
So I do find a way to zero in on the people individually, because I have to. And I also have high relator. So it is more of a struggle, but I get there by still going to individuals to assess where they're at and asking different questions. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it's just a wonderful dialogue to be having. It's interesting to see this blend of where the developer ends up showing up, and in what context you need to sort of have that information first. Susan, I'd like to hear your take on this question before we move on.
Because I hadn't really thought about that, and then as I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking, both. Right, okay, so in reality, so empathy number 1, individualization number 10, woo number 11, bit mixed up kid maybe. I think I like the way that Carolyn. So I think my preference would be the one-on-one, getting to know somebody, and then in that context, because as we know, in a one-on-one, sometimes people will tell you things that they will not share in the team.
Yeah.
So if you're then trying to figure it out as part of the team dynamic, you can't help that individual grow because you don't quite know what their gig is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Got it.
Yes.
Yeah. So so that ability to have that individual piece first, I think would be, again, my preference, like Carolyn's preference. Is it to do with developer? Don't know, because it's maybe got those other things built in.
Yeah, we talk a lot about how our other talents kind of season these, or these maybe season the others, or both ways,
Yeah.
because we know that they don't stand alone, that they all have these great ways that they mesh and meld together, and some of them so strongly. Like, I hear your empathy and developer. I'm sure you have a hard time of separating the two of them. Like, which one is really in control of what's happening there? Whereas I have the same with my responsibility and belief. Is it chicken or the egg in this case, so on that little fun note with the chicken and the egg, we want to like transition to the time where we talk about really some images, or some maybe even pop culture references that that come to mind when you think of this theme. So Susan, I'd like to start with you. What are some images that you have around the theme developer that you'd like to share, maybe to help our audience maybe put an image in their mind when they think of someone who has high developer?
So I think for me, one that Carolyn might share is one that I agree with too, but I'm not.
Okay.
Not good. The one that I immediately thought of, it's not pop culture, but it's just an image of walking beside somebody and being able to have your hand, have their back, literally have their back, so that you can help them at least not fall back, and maybe just there's a nudge, not a huge shove, just a gentle nudge, and there's something about that whole picture is got warmth to it. It's got a lightness and laughter and a forward motion, where you can see the possibilities and the growth that might be there. So that was the first image that came to my mind when I thought about this.
Oh yeah, I love that.
Wonderful.
And thank you for teeing up Carolyn. So Carolyn, share with us what image comes to mind for you with developer.
I will share that. I just so touched by how you said that, Susan. I just had this supportive on the hand on the back. That was beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
So for me, the qualities of a great gardener's personality come to mind, and the skill and the appreciation of the uniqueness of each plant and what is needed to tend to them to help them grow. Patience to sit in the moment, actively, and for humans, actively listen, and wait for the right moment for the plant to do what you need to do. I'm not a gardener, so I'm going to struggle more with the gardener analogy personally,
Sure.
but it is tending. That's what I think.
Mm-hmm.
Human beings need tending, plants need tending, and you need just the right touch to really connect for the bloom to get that.
Oh, I
And
love
also, I
that.
think we spoke about, it's like I had that image about the scattering the seeds, helping someone scatter the
yes.
seeds, and giving it warmth and attention and light means that something will grow.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'll just add on the overuse. If you overuse, overwater, over fertilize,
Right.
you get some withering.
Right.
Right.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because that was one of the things that I was reflecting on overnight between our pre-show and now, is that whole gardener analogy really works, especially when you were talking about being in the present and realizing, hey, I may need to hold off, a day or two to give it more water. If I water it now, it's going to drench it. If I give it, too much fertilizer right now, it's not ready for it. It's going to burn, it's going to burn the roots, it's going to burn the leaves. And so that balance of what do they need right now? And going back to some of those first examples you shared about your daughter, not being quite ready for all the developer and all the input information you wanted to share with her. That sort of same patience and dialing that back and realizing there's a balance that needs to be struck, and staying in that present moment. So I thought that was a beautiful analogy.
I think it's really cute too. You said like for humans, we need an active listening, but I know an awful lot of gardeners who do a lot of talking to their plants. So there must be something to that, like whether that's that nurturing aspect of it's all
Oh,
part of what we're doing, in growing something, whether that's a human, a baby, a normal, another adult, or even a
mhm.
plant in this
Yeah,
case. Yeah.
yeah.
I love
A-
these images.
And I'd like to just tag one on to Susan's image of the arm around or the hand on the back. Mine comes a little bit from youth sports. I think about a youth sports coach, a taller, adult coach putting their arm around a young kid that might be struggling or trying to figure out what they need to do on an athletic field. Um, I've personally sat next to kids on the bench and just be like, so how are things going? What do you need? What's going right? What do you need improvement on? To build their confidence and build their abilities on the field. So I wanted to sort of tie in with that, but also just if you've been on the far side of the field watching from the audience side on watching the bench and watching a coach put their arm around players, I think that it's a very
Yeah.
similar image.
And there's something
So
there about the encourager and the
Mhm.
ability to be a bit of a cheerleader until the
Yes.
person can be their own.
yeah,
Mhm.
Uh,
yeah.
Mm.
Jen, I don't want to leave you out of this conversation. Are there images that come to
oh,
mind for you?
these two ladies mic dropped it, in my
All right.
opinion. Like I love them all, so I'm not even going to add any of my own.
All right. All right. Well, I
So
want to open the door.
yeah, thank you. So with that, I want to move to the part of the show where we really talk about the effects that developer and these talents can have on the team. So Chad's going to work through with us about the positive ways that a team leader and team member can have their developer work for the team. But I want to start with some of those ways that it can maybe get in the way, whether coming from a team leader or a team member perspective. And Carolyn, I'm going to start with you. Do you want to share with us some ways that you feel like the developer theme maybe can come on too hot, or maybe it's missing in a team that you could see where it would
Mhm.
negatively impact?
Right. So if I've worked with a team where there was friction, and they were, because of that friction, there was a bit of lack of trust. And so someone who was an individual contributor with high developer was too much because their helpful guidance wasn't perceived in as positive intent. So that caused additional
Sure.
friction.
Oh,
And
that's a great
so
example.
that stuck out for me, and we were able to navigate it, but that was a great example of the overuse of
Sure.
developer. And then sometimes for a leader, it could be the overuse of I think you should do this, and here's why, but it's also in a mistrustful environment can be misperceived as just that lack of awareness. So the team leader can push, and that friction and lack of trust creates unnecessary drama and doesn't move the team forward.
Wow, really great examples. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Susan, do you have other examples or ways that you feel like the developer theme could get in the way of the team?
Yeah, just to add, I'd agree with what Carolyn said, but the individual contributor, I think something about if you're heavily focused on other people's development, the downside can be other people get irritated at you because you're not in action.
Oh,
Mm.
oh, like you were sharing with us at the beginning about that, like doing through the team, whereas
Yeah,
if you're all worried about what everybody else is doing, you might not actually be doing what we're supposed to be
doing.
doing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Oh,
So
yeah.
again, it's like, and if you're overly positive about other people's strengths, that can be seen as like
Uh,
you're in cloud cuckoo land.
aren't
um,
we all?
so it's like that read the room kind of stuff. You got to read the room.
Sure.
And I think in terms of the team leader piece, just to add to what Carolyn said, which I agree with as well, that bit that I reflected on earlier about sometimes that a wish to really invest in somebody
Mm,
and spend time and bring them forward can be, it can be too much, and it can be, you know, seen as like naive or just like, what you're doing, you've got to move on from that
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, and
person.
I
So again, as a
think,
leader,
yeah, and I think you shared too that that the team leader may want so badly for that person to develop that they almost tell versus helping them see the way, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
and that kind of chimes in with what Carolyn said there about, you know, great, it's great, and let me tell you what to do, because I've seen the
Right.
answer, I've seen the light.
Yeah.
Bam. Like, no, thanks, I'm fine doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Right.
If I could just add to Susan, that comment, that idea that you shared just now, but also in the pre-show, got me thinking overnight about sort of a slight variation on that, which is, if a team leader has that developer theme really high, they could be spending all their time developing the one person that's not coming along. And then they're almost ignoring the 5 or 6 or 10 other people that they could be developing and are open to it. But there's a time suck going and an energy and time suck going to this one person that's just not coming along. You know, going back to the gardener, this flower just isn't blooming. And yet over here, you've got a garden full of flowers that just with a couple drops, what's that? Well, no, just even with a couple drops of encouragement would go much further. And so I also thought that was a really interesting idea that you touched on and introduced us to yesterday, that got me thinking a little bit about how that could be a negative impact on a team.
And I think, again, if you're thinking about it in a balanced way, the joy that you would get as that leader about being able to help the flowers that are already growing and keeping them going. But I do think we do get maybe singularly focused on, come on, and you're like, they're great, but that if we just reinvest in the joy that we get from, oh, look at them. And let me help you.
Yeah.
Interesting. So we've talked about sort of the negative implications of, you know, coming on too strong with developer, or where it can have a negative impact on a team. I'd like to lead us into the sort of the runway of our show here and wrapping up. But as we think about the negatives and flipping that coin and looking at the positives, Susan, I was wondering if you could maybe start us off by sharing some ideas around how this developer theme can be a best contribution, or what the best contribution of this theme is to a team. And again, if maybe you want to start us off by thinking about a team leader with high developer talents, and then maybe an individual contributor, somebody just on the team without that positional power, and how they might contribute their developer themes in the best way possible for a team.
So with the team leader, I think of it, you know, if you've got the sweet spot with the developer theme, I think this is the person who does have the patience, who can work with the individual. And I see another image there where you can help that person if they're in a little cocoon, little chrysalis. They're trying to figure out, you know, who do they want to be when they grow up? And with a bit of help, the leader can support that individual to come out and be that butterfly.
Wonderful image.
And I think that is the power that the leader can have if we hit that sweet spot. And in terms of the individual contributor, if they're again, it's very best, this is the person who gets, and I've used the word joy a few times, I've noticed, but I'm going to use it again, who gets real joy from helping others with no ulterior motive to be their best. And they can bring forward momentum, they can bring positive relationships, they can bring collaboration, they can bring an environment where there's no fear of failure, back to the growth mindset stuff.
Where
people have an opportunity to just be themselves, make those mistakes. It's great, move on, grow. And I think as an individual contributor, that can be really useful.
Wonderful.
Oh, and so powerful and team building in that moment to know that someone's investing in you without having other motives. I love that.
Yeah.
So good.
Carolyn, I'm going to flip the same question to you, and maybe if you start us off with the team leader with developer high, and then the individual contributor with developer high.
Sure. So team leader with high developer has a really great lens on everyone's unique qualities, and that will help produce the best outcomes. Because as a leader, you're really focused on the outcomes. And as a team leader, if you look at each person, you can, for each project, you can slot that person with unique qualities and talents into the right role. And also what comes from that is people feel seen and heard and recognize their value, which leads to high engagement.
Yeah.
And as the individual contributor, then that's the support person on the team. So engagement is high if everybody feels recognized, and developers are naturally great at recognizing and celebrating and saying, great job. And maybe saying, it depends on how close the team is for the individual contributor to share. But if it's a good relationship, it can really help bring out the best of each team member.
Yeah. It's so interesting to hear you share, both of you share those comments, because a lot of that has me reflecting back to our individualization episode, where it's about placing people in the right spots, in the right places, sort of right seat, right bus, right opportunity. And both developer and the individualization theme seem to have that in common. And so it's been interesting to hear this whole conversation, particularly around this team side, in comparison or in wonderful blending with the individualization themes that we've talked about a couple episodes ago. So really intriguing. Just
it is intriguing, the overlap, the characteristics, some characteristics of all 34 blend in some way. I remember in training they said, how you influence, the influencing domain is the least common, but yet we all influence. We just go about it differently. So the overlap of characteristics that we see, it's so illuminating for me. Again, that curiosity of, that's why people do whatever. That was a great point.
Yeah.
Well, and that's why they call them the talent themes, right? Because it's not just developer talent by itself. It's developer is encompassing like all these other words, and a lot of the things that you talked about: passionate, encouraging, supportive, hearing, listening. All of the great qualities that we see in the developer talent really is coming forward and coming through this one. And so I just love hearing it from you guys.
So
I think the other thing, just thinking back to the training as well, one of the things I remember is the themes having different temporal feels to them, like time. And I don't know, maybe the way that Carolyn and I present it, but maybe others are different. But I feel it's an upbeat, forward-looking.
Yeah.
It's not the deliberative. Like slow. I don't mean slower pace, but just there's upbeat energy as opposed to detail focus. For me, as I display it, other people might be different.
No, I think you're onto something there, in that what I've heard throughout this episode is that kind of always looking a little forward, and it may not be decades in the future, it might be just tomorrow, but there tends to be sort of a forward looking, whereas I think one of the things I picked up from the individualization episode was just sort of a depth of knowledge about the person sort of in the moment, and allows them to place people in a similar way to developer, but that it almost has a little bit of a context feel to it, where I get to know the person, I get to know their background. Michael Stafford was our guest, and he talked about knowing people's birthdays and knowing their interests and so forth, and that's much more of a context feel, versus some of the forward thinking, almost futuristic feel that I get a little bit from this developer conversation. So neither one is better or worse than the other, just sort of different feels. And I really appreciate both of you sharing your your experience with this theme and how you live it out. As we wrap up the show, I'm just wondering if each of you, and Susan, I'm going to come to you first about this. If you could maybe one or two highlights from either this episode or something that this has really highlighted for you, or maybe a note about developer that you really want people to walk away from this episode really understanding or really kind of keeping in their brain as they finish this recording and go on to the rest of their work. What should they really know about developer? So I'm gonna invite
Several
you, Susan, first.
there. I'll just answer the one that I want.
Sorry,
Whichever one you want to
I'm trying to
answer.
open up as many sort of possibilities, but
No,
really
it's
we're
great.
looking for, if we were looking, for a
Right.
couple highlights from this episode, what would they be for you?
I think for me, as I thought about it, is that, well, for me, I discovered that I really love the developer theme, which is lucky since it's number 2 for me.
Yeah.
And I think for other people for whom it's not strong, I think it's this positive intent of trying to be a part of somebody's future growth in whatever that means for that individual. Is just so powerful. So if a developer is coming on strong, forgive them and help them. But I think it's got such power for a team or for individuals. So I love it. I hope others find the love in it too.
Wonderful. Carolyn, what would your highlights be?
Well, one is you reminded me, Chad, of your analogy about the thermostat, dialing it up and dialing it down. I love that. And I of course, can relate to my dialing up and dialing down with my developer talent. I think the uniqueness of developer that I love is helping people recognize that what makes them unique, that response of, well, doesn't everybody do this? I no.
Yeah.
And I've thought that way myself, because we see the lens of the world through our own filter, and helping people recognize their filter might be a bit distorted of their own brilliance. It's that gets me fired up. A lot of energy comes from that. Positive energy.
Wonderful. Well, with that, I'm gonna be the first one to say, oh, sorry, Jen, did you have something to add?
Yeah. I wanted to share that what I learned from being with the two of you, and actually just knowing Susan, knowing you personally, and then Carolyn, listening to how the developer shows up in both of you, what I'm hearing is that you really have the ability to hear and see others and able to reflect back who they are to them. Like let them see the wonderfulness that you see in them. And I think that's just such a powerful and beautiful place to start with helping others along their growth. So I just wanted to celebrate you both for being here and being who you are, having the talents you have and using them for good for others. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you for feeding my developer.
Well, I too am going to join Jen in thanking both of you for sharing so openly. I know that we joked in the pre-show about sometimes this theme can have a tendency to overshare, but I really appreciate everything you have shared today, both for Jen and I's benefit, but also for those that are continuing to come back to our podcast and listen and learn about the CliftonStrengths and about what coaching looks like, and particularly this theme of developer. So thank you. Just for housekeeping, for those of you that are listening, if you want to keep coming back and listening to awesome coaches like Susan and Carolyn, we encourage you to like, subscribe, leave us reviews. That helps us with all sorts of the bots that do all the algorithms in terms of promoting our podcast. Leave us a comment if you have something to add in addition to what Carolyn and Susan have offered. Send us an email, and we'd love to add your comments to the wonderful conversation we've had today. So with that,
may I interject? I know you want to wrap up, but the developer in me wants to acknowledge the value, the uniqueness of this show and what you bring for people to truly understand their talents, themes more fully.
Oh, well, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you for that,
Absolutely.
Carolyn. Well, with that, I'm gonna let that be the sort of mic drop to the end of our show. Again, I'm Chad Ahern from Talent Teams Consulting. My co-host is
Jen Werner from Jen Werner Coaching.
And again, we're going to say thank you for Carolyn Grant and Susan Gordon today. And we hope all of you will be back again soon to listen to another episode. So thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.